Welcome to Sleepless Survivors. Tonight, we journey back through the mists of time to explore the forbidden temples of ancient Babylon. Those sacred spaces that once stood as monuments to humanity's earliest attempts to reach the divine. Let your mind drift as we wander through these ancient halls, reconstructing their mysteries, their rituals, and the civilization that built them. Close your eyes, breathe deeply, and allow yourself to be transported to a world that existed thousands of years before our time. The air is thick with incense as we stand at the gates of ancient Babylon. It is early morning, and the first rays of sunlight are just beginning to paint the sky in shades of amber and rose. Before us rises the greatest city of the ancient world, its walls stretching so high and so wide that they were counted among the wonders of the world. But we are not here for the walls, magnificent though they are. We are here for something more mysterious, more spiritual, more forbidden. We are here for the temples. Babylon, whose very name conjures images of decadence and power, was first and foremost a city of the gods. Every street, every building, every brick was laid with divine purpose. The Babylonians believed that their city was the dwelling place of the gods on earth, and nowhere was this belief more evident than in the temples that dominated the urban landscape. These were not simple houses of worship as we might understand them today. They were gateways between heaven and earth, places where the mortal and divine realms touched and intermingled. Let us walk slowly through the Ishtar Gate, that magnificent entrance adorned with glazed blue bricks and golden dragons. Feel the cool morning air on your skin. Hear the distant sounds of the city awakening. The merchants are beginning to set up their stalls. The priests are preparing for the morning rituals. The smell of baking bread mingles with the ever-present scent of incense that seems to permeate every corner of this sacred city. As we pass through the gate, we find ourselves on the processional way, that great ceremonial road that leads to the heart of Babylon's religious district. The walls on either side are decorated with relief sculptures of lions, the symbol of Ishtar, the goddess of love and war. These lions seem to watch us as we walk, their eyes following our movement, guardians of the sacred precinct we are about to enter. The processional way stretches before us, long and straight, leading our eyes toward the massive stepped pyramid that dominates the skyline. This is the Anunnaki, the temple of Marduk, the chief god of Babylon. Its name means House of the Foundation of Heaven and Earth, and it rises in 7 enormous tiers, each painted a different colour, each representing a different celestial body, a different aspect of the divine cosmos. But before we reach that towering structure, let us pause and consider what these temples meant to the people who built them and worshipped in them. To understand the forbidden temples of Babylon, we must first understand the Babylonian worldview, their conception of the universe and humanity's place within it. The Babylonians believed that before the world existed, there was only chaos, represented by Tiamat, the primordial goddess of the salt sea, and Apsu, her consort, god of the fresh waters. From their mingling came the first gods, and eventually, through conflict and struggle, Marduk emerged as the supreme deity. He slew Tiamat, and from her body created the heavens and the earth. From the blood of her consort Kingu he created humanity. But humanity was not created for its own sake. In Babylonian theology, humans were created to serve the gods, to provide them with food, drink and shelter through sacrifice and ritual. The temples, therefore, were not merely places where humans came to worship. They were the actual homes of the gods, places where the deities resided in physical form through their cult statues, where they ate the food offerings, where they held court, and where they made their will known to their human servants. This understanding transforms how we see these structures as we approach them. These temples were living, breathing centres of divine power. To enter them without permission, to violate their sacred precincts, to see what was meant only for the eyes of the initiated priests was not merely sacrilege. It was dangerous. It risked the wrath of the gods themselves. This is what made these temples forbidden, not in the sense that they were hidden away, but in the sense that their innermost sanctums were reserved only for those who'd been consecrated to divine service. As we continue down the processional way, we pass smaller temples dedicated to various deities of the Babylonian pantheon. Each of these structures follows a similar pattern, variations on a theme that had been developing in Mesopotamia for thousands of years, before Babylon reached its height of power. Let us enter one of these smaller temples, dedicated to Nabu, the god of writing and wisdom. The entrance is through a courtyard open to the sky. Here, ordinary citizens could come to make offerings and prayers. The walls around us are thick, built of mud brick, plastered and painted with scenes of divine and royal power. We see images of Nabu himself shown as a bearded figure wearing a horned crown, the symbol of divinity in Mesopotamian art. He holds a stylus, his attribute as god of scribes. In this courtyard, we can hear the murmur of prayers. A merchant has come to ask for success in a trading venture. A scribe seeks inspiration for an important document he must compose. A mother prays for her sick child. They bring offerings, small figurines, incense, occasionally an animal for sacrifice. These offerings are received by lower-ranking priests who serve as intermediaries between the people and the higher mysteries that lie deeper within the temple. The courtyard is as far as most Babylonians ever penetrate into their temples. Beyond this public space lies a series of increasingly restricted areas, each requiring greater levels of purity and initiation to enter. Let us imagine that we have been granted permission to proceed, that we have undergone the necessary purification rituals, that we walk now as initiated priests into the deeper mysteries. We pass through a doorway into a covered hall. The temperature drops noticeably. The sounds from the courtyard fade to a distant murmur. The air is heavy with the scent of cedar and cypress, precious woods imported at great expense and burned as offerings to the gods. Our eyes adjust slowly to the dimmer light. Oil lamps flicker in niches along the walls, casting dancing shadows that make the painted murals seem to move with life of their own. Here we find the temple's administrative chambers, its storage rooms, its workshops. Temples in Babylon were not just religious centres but economic powerhouses. They owned vast tracts of land, employed hundreds or even thousands of people, and engaged in trade and commerce on a grand scale. The wealth that flowed through these sacred precincts was staggering, all dedicated to the service of the gods. We see scribes sitting cross-legged on the floor, their clay tablets spread before them, carefully recording every transaction, every offering, every pronouncement of the god. The cuneiform script flows from their styluses, those wedge-shaped marks that represent one of humanity's earliest forms of writing. These records will be dried in the sun and stored in the temple archives, where some of them will remain undisturbed for thousands of years, eventually to be discovered by archaeologists who will use them to reconstruct the daily life of this ancient civilization. But we must move deeper still. Through another doorway we enter a hall of greater sanctity. Here the ordinary business of the temple gives way to ritual preparation. We find ourselves in the presence of high priests, men who have dedicated their entire lives to the service of Nabu. They wear special garments of fine linen. Their heads are shaved. They have undergone extensive purification rituals, bathing repeatedly, abstaining from certain foods, maintaining celibacy during their periods of temple service. These priests are preparing for the evening ritual, when they will enter the presence of the god himself to provide him with his meal. They handle sacred vessels made of precious metals, gold and silver cups and plates that will hold the offerings. They prepare the food itself, selecting the finest bread, the best cuts of meat, the purest water, the most fragrant beer. Everything must be perfect, for they are preparing a meal for a god. As they work, they chant in low voices, ancient hymns in the Sumerian language, which by the time of Babylon's greatness was already a dead tongue, preserved only in religious ritual, much as Latin would be in medieval Christianity. The Sumerian words add an additional layer of mystery and sanctity to the proceedings. Even the priests may not fully understand all the words they chant, but the sounds themselves are sacred, passed down through generations, infused with power through countless repetitions over countless centuries. Now comes the moment we've been waiting for, the moment of greatest mystery and greatest danger. We're about to enter the inner sanctum, the Holy of Holies, the actual dwelling place of the god. In Babylonian temples, this innermost chamber is called the cellar. Only the highest-ranking priests may enter here, and only after extensive purification, and only at prescribed times. The door to the cellar is not large or ostentatious. It is, in fact, rather small and plain, a simple wooden door bound with bronze. But everyone present regards it with a mixture of reverence and fear. Beyond that door sits the god himself, or rather, the cult statue that is believed to house the divine presence, the actual body through which the god interacts with the physical world. The high priest approaches the door. He speaks a prayer, so quietly we cannot make out the words. He lifts the latch and pushes the door open. A wave of incense rolls out, so thick it is almost visible. The scent is overwhelming, a complex mixture of frankincense, myrrh, cedar, and other aromatics. Behind the scent comes an almost palpable sense of presence, of power barely contained. The room beyond is small, perhaps only 15 feet on a side, but it is richly appointed. The walls are covered in sheet gold, the floor is polished stone, and at the far end, on a raised dais, sits the statue of Nabu. The statue is life-sized, perhaps even slightly larger. It is made of wood, covered in gold leaf, with eyes of precious stones that seem to gleam with inner light in the flickering lamplight. The god is seated on a throne, his hands resting on his knees, his expression serene yet somehow also commanding. He wears elaborate robes carved into the wood and covered with gold. On his head sits the horned crown of divinity. The high priest prostrates himself before the statue. He remains in this position for a long moment, forehead pressed to the cool stone floor. Then he rises and begins the evening service. He washes the statue's face with sacred water. He anoints it with perfumed oil. He dresses it in fresh garments. He places food and drink on the table before the statue. Throughout this process, he maintains a constant stream of prayers and incantations. This is not symbolic action. The priest truly believes that he is caring for the god, that Nabu is present in this statue, that the god needs these services just as a human king needs servants to care for his physical needs. The food that is placed before the statue will later be removed and consumed by the priests, but this is understood not as the priest eating sacrificial food, but as the priest consuming the leftovers from the god's meal, food that has been blessed by divine consumption. After the meal service is complete, the priest engages in divination. He asks the god questions about the future, about the will of heaven, about what actions should be taken. The answers come through various means, through the interpretation of dreams, through the examination of animal entrails, through the observation of oil patterns on water, through the study of celestial phenomena. All these methods require years of training to master, and all are based on the fundamental belief that the gods communicate with humans through signs and omens, if only we have the wisdom to interpret them correctly. As we observe this ritual, we must remember that we are witnessing something that ordinary Babylonians never saw. The mystery of the inner sanctum was carefully guarded. Those who violated these sacred precincts without authorization faced severe punishment, possibly even death. These spaces were forbidden not arbitrarily, but because they were understood to be dangerous. To approach the divine presence without proper preparation, without the necessary purity, without the protective knowledge of the correct rituals, was to risk divine wrath. The gods were not distant, abstract concepts, but immediate, powerful realities whose favour needed to be constantly maintained, and whose anger was to be avoided at all costs. Let us leave the cellar now and emerge back into the cooler air of the outer halls. Our minds are reeling from what we have witnessed. The intensity of that concentrated divine presence, the absolute conviction of the priest in the reality of the god's presence, the meticulous attention to every detail of the ritual, all of this combines to create an experience that is alien to our modern sensibilities, yet somehow also strangely moving. We make our way back to the processional way. The sun is beginning to set now, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The great stepped pyramid of Marduk's temple looms before us, even more impressive in the slanting evening light. This is the Enki, the structure that may have inspired the biblical story of the Tower of Babel, though that tale transforms Babylon's greatest monument to piety into a symbol of human arrogance. The Enki was truly a wonder of the ancient world. Ancient texts tell us it rose to a height of about 300 feet, built in 7 stages, each smaller than the one below, creating that distinctive stepped pyramid shape known as a ziggurat. Each level was painted a different colour corresponding to one of the 7 celestial bodies known to the Babylonians: the sun, the moon, and the 5 visible planets. At the base of the ziggurat was a large temple complex where public rituals were conducted. But the real mystery, the real forbidden sanctum, lay at the very top of the structure. There, 7 long flights of stairs above the ground, accessible only to the highest priests, sat a small shrine dedicated to Marduk himself, supreme god of Babylon. Climbing those stairs must have been an ordeal. In the heat of a Mesopotamian summer, ascending 300 feet of steep steps, would have left even the youngest and fittest priest exhausted. But this physical challenge was also a spiritual journey, a gradual ascent from the earthly realm to the celestial, from the profane to the sacred. Ancient accounts tell us that in this uppermost shrine was kept a magnificent bed and a golden table. Here it was said the god Marduk would descend from heaven to spend the night with his chosen consort, a priestess selected from among the women of Babylon. This ritual marriage between god and priestess was understood to ensure the fertility of the land, the prosperity of the city, and the continuation of cosmic order. The details of what occurred in that chamber at the top of the ziggurat were closely guarded secrets. The priestess who ascended those stairs went alone. She spent the night in the presence of the god. What visions she saw, what communion she experienced, what messages she received from the divine, all of this remained between her and Marduk. When she descended the next morning, she might convey certain pronouncements or prophecies to the waiting priests, but the core experience remained mysterious, forbidden to all but the one chosen to participate. We cannot ascend those stairs tonight. Even in our imagination there are boundaries we should not cross. Some mysteries must remain mysteries. Instead, let us walk around the base of the great ziggurat, marvelling at its immensity, contemplating the generations of labour that went into its construction. The ziggurat was not built all at once, but grew over centuries, each king adding to it, expanding it, beautifying it. To build such a structure required not just massive amounts of labour and material, but also sophisticated engineering knowledge. The Babylonians had to calculate angles and weights, had to develop techniques for creating stability in a structure of mud brick that rose to such heights. They had to solve problems of water drainage, of thermal expansion and contraction, of the gradual settling that any building experiences over time. But beyond the technical challenges, the ziggurat represented an enormous investment of social resources. The thousands of workers who made the bricks, who carried them into place, who built the structure step by step, all had to be fed, housed, organised, and directed. The economic surplus that made such projects possible was generated by the agricultural productivity of the Mesopotamian plain, that flat land between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, where irrigation made it possible to produce far more food than the farmers themselves needed to survive. This surplus was controlled by the temples and the palace, and much of it was redirected into projects like the ziggurat, into the service of the gods who were understood to be the ultimate owners of the land and guarantors of its fertility. In this sense, the great temples of Babylon were not separate from everyday economic and social life, but intimately bound up with it. The temple was employer, landlord, bank, archive, school, and centre of religious life all at once. As darkness falls completely, torches are lit around the temple complex. The flickering flames cast dramatic shadows on the walls of the ziggurat. Somewhere in the distance we hear chanting. Another ritual is beginning in one of the countless shrines and temples that fill this sacred quarter of the city. Let us walk through the streets of Babylon at night. The city takes on a different character in darkness. The heat of the day has passed, and a cool breeze from the river brings some relief. Most of the shops have closed, but the taverns are busy. We hear the sound of conversation, laughter, the occasional dispute. Life continues in its ordinary patterns even in this most sacred of cities. We pass by the temple of Ishtar, goddess of love and war, of sexuality and violence, one of the most complex and fascinating deities in the Babylonian pantheon. Her temple was known throughout the ancient world, but for reasons that were sometimes viewed with suspicion by outsiders. The worship of Ishtar included aspects that some neighbouring cultures found shocking: sacred prostitution, ritual acts that blurred the lines between sexuality and spirituality, rites of passage that involved the temporary suspension of normal social rules. To the Babylonians, these practices were holy, ways of participating in the goddess's power, of ensuring fertility and abundance. To outsiders, they seemed forbidden, transgressive, perhaps even dangerous. The Greek historian Herodotus, writing many centuries later, described a ritual he claimed occurred at Ishtar's temple in Babylon. According to his account, every woman in the city was required once in her life to sit in the temple precinct and offer herself to a stranger. Only after she'd fulfilled this duty could she return to her normal life. Modern scholars debate the accuracy of Herodotus's account. He was writing long after Babylon's glory days, and he had a tendency to report sensational stories without always verifying them. But whether or not his specific details are accurate, They point to a reality that is certainly true. The worship of Ishtar involved a sacred sexuality that was integral to Babylonian religious life, but seemed deeply forbidden to outsiders who did not share their understanding. This raises an important question about what we mean when we talk about the forbidden temples of Babylon. Forbidden to whom? From one perspective, all the temples were forbidden, their inner sanctums restricted to initiated priests, their mysteries guarded jealously. But from another perspective, these temples were the very centre of Babylonian life, accessible to all citizens in their outer courts, known to everyone, the heartbeat of the city. The real forbidden knowledge was not the existence of the temples, but the understanding of what went on in their innermost chambers, the direct experience of the divine presence that was reserved for the priestly elite. This knowledge was forbidden not because it was evil, but because it was dangerous, because direct contact with the divine required preparation and protection that ordinary people lacked. Let us consider what it meant to be a priest in ancient Babylon. These were not part-time religious functionaries who held regular jobs and led services on the weekend. They were full-time professionals who had undergone years of training. As boys, they would have entered temple service, learning first the basics of reading and writing, for literacy was primarily a priestly skill in this society. They would have memorized vast amounts of religious texts, hymns, prayers, incantations. They would have learned the complex rituals required for various festivals and ceremonies. They would have studied divination, learning to interpret omens and signs. They would have learned astronomy, for the movements of the celestial bodies were understood to reflect the actions and intentions of the gods. They would have learned mathematics, for the proper conduct of rituals required precise calculations of times and measures. They would have learned medicine, for healing was understood as a sacred art, a way of driving out the demons of disease. They would have learned music, for hymns were an essential part of worship. In short, they would have acquired much of the learning of their culture, for knowledge and religion were not separate spheres but intimately connected. And throughout their training they would have undergone purification rituals of increasing intensity, gradually preparing them for closer and closer approach to the divine presence. By the time a priest was allowed to enter the cellar to stand in the actual presence of the god, he had spent perhaps 20 or 30 years in preparation. This extensive preparation was necessary because the Babylonians understood the divine presence as something like a powerful electrical current. It could illuminate and empower, but it could also burn and destroy. The proper rituals, the correct prayers, the state of purity, all these were like insulation, allowing the priest to channel that divine power safely. This understanding of the divine as powerful and potentially dangerous is quite different from many modern religious sensibilities. We often think of the spiritual as comforting, as a source of peace and reassurance. For the Babylonians, the spiritual was awesome in the original sense of that word, inspiring awe that contained both attraction and fear. As we walk through the dark streets, we come upon another temple, this one dedicated to Shamash, the sun god, deity of justice and divine law. The temple is quiet now, but we can imagine what it was like during the day, when petitioners came seeking justice in disputes. Shamash was understood as the divine judge who saw all human actions, whose light revealed all hidden deeds. His priests served as judges in the human realm, settling disputes according to the principles of divine law. The famous law code of Hammurabi, that ancient Babylonian king who ruled in the 18th century before the Common Era, was understood not as human legislation but as divine revelation, laws that Shamash himself had given to the king to promulgate among the people. The idea that justice comes from the gods, that law has a sacred origin and purpose, was fundamental to Babylonian society. The temples were not just places of ritual, but centres of social order, guarantors of justice, sources of the rules that made civilization possible. We find a quiet spot and sit, resting our tired feet, looking up at the stars that fill the night sky above Babylon. The Babylonians were careful observers of the heavens. They mapped the movements of the stars and planets with remarkable accuracy. They developed a sophisticated mathematical astronomy that allowed them to predict celestial events. But for them, astronomy was never separate from astrology. The movements of the heavenly bodies were not random physical events, but signs of divine intention. The gods communicated through the stars. A careful observer, trained in the sacred science, could read the future in the patterns of the night sky. Jupiter was associated with Marduk, Venus with Ishtar, Saturn with Ninurta. Each planet's movements carried messages about the god it represented. The priests kept detailed records of celestial observations, correlating them with earthly events, building up over generations a complex system of celestial divination. This close observation of the heavens, motivated by religious concerns, laid the groundwork for the development of astronomy as a science. Centuries after Babylon fell, Greek astronomers would build on the observations and calculations of Babylonian priests. The knowledge generated in these forbidden temples, in the service of the gods, would eventually contribute to the secular science of our own time. Let us rise and continue our nocturnal wandering. We make our way toward the Euphrates River, that great waterway that bisects the city. The river was itself sacred, a god named Id in Babylonian mythology. To the Babylonians, all natural forces were divine. The earth, the sky, the rivers, the storms, all were manifestations of divine power. This meant that the natural world was always potentially dangerous, always worthy of respect and propitiation. You did not simply use nature. You entered into relationship with it. You negotiated with the gods who controlled it. Before beginning any major project, before planting crops or starting a journey or building a house, you sought divine approval through divination, and you made appropriate offerings. We reach the river's edge. The water flows dark and silent, carrying with it the runoff from the mountains far to the north. Somewhere upstream is the spring where the Euphrates emerges from the ground, itself a sacred site, a place where the waters of the underworld break through into the world of light. Water played a central role in Babylonian religious thought. Ea, god of the freshwater depths, was one of the wisest of the gods, the one who had warned the hero Utnapishtim of the coming flood and helped him build the ark that would save humanity. The story of this ancient flood, preserved in Babylonian texts, bears striking similarities to the later biblical flood narrative, suggesting cultural exchange and shared mythological heritage across the ancient Near East. Purification rituals almost always involved water. Before entering the temple, priests would wash. Before important ceremonies, participants would bathe. Water was understood as having the power to remove spiritual pollution, to restore purity, to create the clean slate necessary for approaching the divine. We stand by the river for a while, listening to its gentle sound, watching the reflection of torches and stars on its surface. The city around us is quieting as people settle in for the night, but the temples never fully sleep. Throughout the night, priests maintain their vigil, ensuring that the divine presences are properly attended, that the necessary rituals are performed at their appointed times. Let us now make our way to one more temple before we rest. This is the Temple of Sin, the moon god, one of the oldest deities in the Mesopotamian pantheon. The moon was especially important in Babylonian timekeeping. The calendar was lunar, divided into months that followed the phases of the moon. The first sighting of the new crescent moon marked the beginning of a new month, a sacred moment that was carefully observed and ceremonially announced. Sin's temple is built around a large courtyard with a pool at its centre. The moon's reflection shines on the water's surface, creating a second moon, earthly twin of its celestial counterpart. Priests are gathered around this pool, chanting. Their voices rise and fall in a haunting melody, wordless at times, at other times forming prayers in the ancient Sumerian tongue. This is a ritual of the full moon, a monthly ceremony of renewal and blessing. The full moon was seen as the time of the moon god's greatest power, when his light drove back the darkness, when his blessings were most available to his worshippers. We watch from a discreet distance, not wanting to intrude on this sacred moment. The priests move in a slow procession around the pool, each carrying a small clay lamp. The combined light of dozens of these lamps creates a warm glow that competes with the cooler light of the moon. As they circle, they periodically stop and bow toward the moon, toward the pool, toward the cellar at the heart of the temple, where Sin's statue resides. The choreography is precise, the result of generations of tradition, every movement laden with meaning, every gesture part of a language of divine communication that the initiated understand but that remains opaque to outsiders. This is the mystery at the heart of the forbidden temples, not that they contain scandalous secrets or terrible knowledge, but that they house a way of experiencing reality that is fundamentally different from everyday perception. In these sacred spaces, the invisible becomes visible, the distant becomes near, the abstract becomes concrete. The gods are not philosophical concepts, but living presences. The cosmos is not a blind mechanism but a meaningful order. Human life is not random but part of a grand divine plan. To enter these spaces without the proper preparation, without the years of training that allow you to navigate them safely, is dangerous. Not because the gods are capricious or cruel, but because you lack the conceptual tools and spiritual armour to handle what you will encounter there. It would be like entering a high-voltage electrical room without understanding electricity. The danger is real, but it comes from your own ignorance, not from malice. As the ritual concludes, the priests file back into the inner chambers of the temple. We are left alone in the courtyard, just us and the moon and the still water of the pool. The silence is profound. Even the sounds of the city seem far away, muffled by the thick temple walls. Let us take a moment to reflect on all we have seen tonight. We have walked through the streets of the greatest city of the ancient world. We have stood before its most sacred structures. We have glimpsed, if only briefly and imperfectly, the religious life that animated this civilization. Babylon is gone now. The temples have crumbled into dust. The priests are long dead. The gods they served are no longer worshipped. The cuneiform tablets that recorded their rituals and beliefs are scattered in museums around the world, puzzled over by scholars, their contents gradually being translated and understood. Yet something of Babylon survives. The city's influence on subsequent cultures was profound. The Hebrew Bible is full of references to Babylon, sometimes viewing it as an enemy, sometimes as a place of exile and suffering, but always as a power to be reckoned with. Jewish religious thought was shaped in part by contact with Babylonian ideas. The names of months in the Hebrew calendar are borrowed from Babylonian. Concepts of angels and demons, of cosmic struggle between good and evil, all show traces of Babylonian influence. Greek culture too was influenced by Babylon. When Alexander the Great conquered the city in 331 before the Common Era, he was so impressed by its grandeur that he planned to make it his capital. He died in Babylon, in the palace of Nebuchadnezzar, before he could realize his dream. But Greek scholars had already been absorbing Babylonian learning, mathematical astronomy, medical knowledge, astronomical cycles, all flowed westward from Mesopotamia to Greece and eventually to us. The forbidden temples of Babylon, then, are part of our heritage, part of the long story of human attempts to understand the cosmos and our place within it. They represent an approach to reality that is different from our own, but not therefore entirely alien or incomprehensible. We can recognize in Babylonian religious practice an earnest attempt to make sense of a world that was often harsh and unpredictable. Why do storms come? Why do crops fail? Why do we sicken and die? The Babylonians answered these questions in terms of divine will, but underlying that answer was a conviction that the universe was fundamentally orderly, that effects had causes, that if you could understand the patterns, you could to some degree predict and perhaps even influence outcomes. Their divination practices, which seem like mere superstition to modern eyes, were actually proto-scientific attempts at finding patterns in complexity. The careful observation required, the meticulous record-keeping, the systematic attempts to correlate celestial events with earthly outcomes, all of this prefigures scientific method, even if the underlying theory was theological rather than naturalistic. The temples themselves, as centres of learning and repositories of knowledge, played a role similar to universities in later cultures. The priests were intellectuals, scholars who preserved and transmitted the accumulated wisdom of their civilization. The temple schools trained scribes who would go on to work in the palace administration, in the military, in private commerce. Literacy spread from the temples outward into society, and the ethical content of Babylonian religion should not be overlooked. Shamash's role as divine judge, Marduk's imposition of order on primordial chaos, the emphasis on proper ritual as a way of maintaining cosmic balance, all of this conveyed moral lessons. You were expected to act justly, to fulfill your obligations, to maintain right relationships with gods and humans alike. The law code of Hammurabi, displayed on a stone stela in one of Babylon's temples, is one of humanity's earliest attempts at comprehensive written law. While some of its provisions strike us as harsh, and while it clearly reflects a hierarchical society in which not all people had equal rights, it nevertheless represents an important step in the development of the rule of law, the idea that justice should be predictable and based on known principles rather than arbitrary power. As we sit here in the quiet courtyard, the moon slowly traversing the sky above us, we can feel the weight of history. This place where we sit was once the centre of the world. Envoys came here from distant lands. Merchants traded goods that had travelled hundreds or thousands of miles. Scholars debated questions of cosmology and theology. Priests performed rituals that they believed maintained the very order of the universe, and now it is gone. Or more accurately, it has transformed. The temples have fallen, but the questions they try to answer remain. What is our place in the universe? How should we live? What happens after death? Why do we suffer? These are human questions, not tied to any particular time or culture. The Babylonians answered these questions in their way, through their elaborate mythology, their complex rituals, their magnificent temples. We answer them differently, through science and philosophy and various religious traditions. But we are all part of the same conversation, a conversation that extends back to the very origins of human culture. Let us leave the Temple of Sin now, and make our way through the darkened streets toward the place where we will rest for the night. As we walk, we pass the occasional night watchman, ensuring the safety of the city while its inhabitants sleep. We pass a few late-night travellers, perhaps merchants who have just arrived after a long journey and are seeking the caravanserai where they can stable their animals and find lodging. The great ziggurat looms in the darkness, a black mass against the starry sky. No light shows from its summit tonight. The god sleeps, if gods can be said to sleep, content that his servants have properly attended to his needs, secure in his lordship over Babylon. We find lodging in a modest inn not far from the temple district. The innkeeper greets us with the traditional blessing, "May Shamash lengthen your days." We respond with the customary reply, "May the gods look favourably upon your house." These formulaic exchanges are more than mere politeness. They reflect a worldview in which divine favour is the foundation of all prosperity, in which every human interaction occurs within the context of a cosmos filled with divine presences. Our room is simple but clean. A clay lamp provides flickering light. There is a sleeping mat, a water jar, little else. We lie down, exhausted from our long day of exploration. As sleep begins to claim us, our mind drifts back over all we have seen. We think of the priests in the cellar, caring for the statue of the god. We think of the priestess at the top of the ziggurat, alone with Marduk through the night. We think of the rituals and the prayers, the incense and the sacrifices, the whole elaborate system through which the Babylonians maintained their relationship with the divine. And as we drift into sleep, we dream. We dream of walking through the processional way on the day of the New Year festival, the greatest celebration of the Babylonian calendar. The streets are thronged with people. Priests carry the statue of Marduk from his temple, displaying it to the crowds who prostrate themselves as it passes. The air is filled with the sound of music, drums and lyres and voices raised in song. The procession makes its way to a special building outside the city, the Akitu house where the climactic rituals of the New Year will be performed. Here, in ceremonies that recapitulate the cosmic battle between Marduk and Tiamat, the order of the universe is renewed for another year. The king participates in these rituals, being stripped of his regalia, ritually humiliated, then restored to power, his authority renewed through divine blessing. These rituals are crucial to Babylonian society. They are not just religious observances, but the very mechanism through which cosmic and social order is maintained. If they are not performed correctly, if any detail is omitted or any word misspoken, the consequences could be dire. The crops could fail, enemies could invade, chaos could return. So the priests prepare meticulously, consulting ancient texts, rehearsing every movement, purifying themselves repeatedly. Nothing is left to chance. The fate of the kingdom, perhaps of the entire world, depends on getting these rituals right. In our dream, we watch the ceremonies unfold. We see the priests in their elaborate costumes, hear their chanted prayers in ancient tongues, smell the overwhelming scent of incense. We feel the intensity of belief, the absolute conviction that what is happening here matters, that human actions in this sacred space have cosmic consequences. And then the dream shifts. We are no longer observers but participants. We are climbing the stairs of the great ziggurat, ascending toward the shrine at its summit. Our legs are tired, our breath comes hard, but we cannot stop. We must reach the top, we must enter the presence of the god. We climb and climb past the first tier, the second, the third. Each level is painted a different colour, glowing in the sunlight. Below us, the city spreads out in all directions, a vast expanse of buildings and gardens, walls and canals, the Euphrates cutting through it all like a silver ribbon. We reach the seventh and final tier. The shrine sits before us, small and unassuming, yet radiating a sense of power that makes our hair stand on end. The door stands open, an invitation and a challenge. Do we dare enter? Are we worthy? Have we prepared sufficiently? We take a deep breath and step across the threshold. Inside, the shrine is dim, lit only by a few oil lamps. But gradually our eyes adjust and we see the statue of Marduk, seated in majesty on his throne. His eyes seem to look directly at us, seeing into our very soul. We try to speak, to offer a prayer, but no words come. We are struck dumb by the intensity of the presence we feel in this small space. This is not a statue, not just carved wood and gold leaf. This is, in some way we cannot fully comprehend, the God himself. This is the power that created the world, that maintains the order of the cosmos, that decides the fate of nations and individuals. We fall to our knees, then prostrate ourselves fully, forehead pressed against the cool stone floor. We lie there, trembling, aware of our own smallness, our own ignorance, our own unworthiness to be in this place. And yet, mingled with the fear, there is also a strange joy, a sense of connection to something far greater than ourselves, a fleeting glimpse of meaning that transcends our ordinary understanding. How long we lie there, we cannot say. Time seems to lose its normal quality in the presence of the divine, but eventually we become aware of a voice, though whether we hear it with our ears or only in our mind, we cannot tell. The voice speaks not in Babylonian or Sumerian, but in a language beyond language, communicating directly from consciousness to consciousness. The message is not specific, not a prediction or a command, but more a feeling, a sense of being seen and known and, despite our flaws and failures, accepted. We are part of the divine plan. Our life, however insignificant it may seem, has meaning and purpose. The order of the cosmos encompasses and includes us. We are not alone, not abandoned, not meaningless specks in an uncaring universe, but children of the gods, created for a purpose, loved despite our unworthiness. As this sense of acceptance and belonging washes over us, we feel tears streaming down our face. These are not tears of sadness, but of relief, of joy, of gratitude. This is what the forbidden temples were trying to provide, not secret knowledge or magical power, but this sense of connection, of meaning, of being part of something greater than ourselves. And then the presence recedes, the intensity fades, we are just ourselves again, lying on the floor of a shrine at the top of a ziggurat in ancient Babylon. Slowly we rise to our feet. We back out of the shrine, never turning our back on the statue as protocol demands. We emerge into the bright sunlight on the top platform of the ziggurat. Below us spreads the whole city. From this vantage point we can see the overall plan, the careful layout of streets and districts, the placement of temples and palaces, the protective circuit of the walls. We can see the patterns that are invisible at ground level. We can see the order that underlies the apparent chaos of urban life. And as we stand there, taking in this view, we understand something of what the Babylonians were trying to achieve with their religion. They were trying to impose order on chaos, to find meaning in randomness, to create human community in the face of the vast indifference of nature. The temples were not just buildings, but statements of human aspiration, monuments to our refusal to accept meaninglessness, our insistence that life has purpose even in the face of death, that order can be maintained even in a world full of danger and uncertainty. We begin the long descent down the stairs of the ziggurat. As we descend, we move from the realm of pure divine presence back into the world of human affairs, from the sacred to the profane, from the eternal to the temporal. But we carry with us something of what we experienced at the top. We are changed by our encounter with the divine. This is the power and purpose of the forbidden temples, transformation. Those who entered the inner sanctums were not meant to simply observe or learn information. They were meant to be changed, to have their understanding expanded, their priorities reordered, their sense of self and world transformed by direct encounter with ultimate reality. The dream begins to fade. We find ourselves back in the simple room at the inn, lying on our sleeping mat. The clay lamp has burned out. The room is dark except for the faint light that filters through the small window from the street outside. We lie there, Not quite awake, but no longer dreaming, in that liminal state between sleeping and waking where the boundaries between different kinds of reality become fluid. We think about the forbidden knowledge of the temples. What was it, really? Not spells or incantations, not secret histories or conspiracy theories. The real forbidden knowledge was experiential. The direct encounter with divine presence, the transformation of consciousness that came from properly conducted ritual in sacred space, the reorganization of perception that allowed you to see ordinary reality as shot through with divine meaning. This knowledge could not be transmitted through words or books. It could only be experienced directly, and then only after extensive preparation. This is why it was forbidden, restricted to initiates, not because of jealous guarding of power, but because it required context and preparation to be safe and meaningful. A person who entered the cellar without understanding, without the proper mental and spiritual framework, would see only a statue. They might find it impressive artistically, might appreciate the gold and precious stones, but they would miss the point entirely. They would not experience the presence of the god because they had not learned how to perceive it. The priest's years of training were not just about memorizing texts and learning rituals. They were about cultivating a particular mode of perception, a particular stance toward reality, in which the invisible divine dimension was just as real, just as immediate, as the visible physical world. To see with priestly eyes was to see a world alive with divine presence, a world in which every object and event had layers of meaning, in which the boundary between matter and spirit was permeable, in which human actions had cosmic consequences. This way of seeing is largely lost to us now. We have gained much through our scientific worldview, our naturalistic explanations for phenomena that the Babylonians attributed to the gods. We have gained power over nature, the ability to predict and control many aspects of our environment that were mysterious and threatening to ancient peoples. But perhaps we have also lost something, that sense of living in a meaningful cosmos, of being connected to something greater than ourselves, of having a defined place and purpose in a grand order. The Babylonians, for all their limitations, for all their beliefs that we would now consider erroneous, possessed a sense of cosmic belonging that many modern people lack. The sky is beginning to lighten, dawn is approaching. In the temples throughout Babylon, priests are beginning the morning rituals, rousing the gods from their sleep, washing and dressing the sacred statues, offering the first meal of the day. The city is stirring, merchants are opening their shops, bakers are firing their ovens, farmers from the surrounding countryside are bringing their produce to market. Another day in Babylon is beginning, superficially like countless days before it, yet each day unique, each day carrying the possibility of divine favour or divine punishment, each day requiring vigilance and piety, ritual observance and moral uprightness. We rise from our sleeping mat and prepare ourselves for the day. We go to the courtyard of the inn where there is a well. We draw water and wash our face and hands, a small act of purification, a way of marking the transition from sleep to waking, from private rest to public engagement. As we wash, we think about the pervasive role of ritual in Babylonian life. Every transition, every threshold, was marked by some ritual action. Waking, eating, leaving the house, entering the market, greeting a friend, beginning a journey. All of these ordinary activities were embedded in a framework of ritual significance. This constant ritual attention might seem burdensome to us, accustomed as we are to greater spontaneity and informality. But for the Babylonians, these rituals provided a sense of security and order. They were ways of acknowledging the sacred dimension of reality, of maintaining right relationship with the divine forces that permeated all existence. We make our way back to the temple district. It is time for the morning service at the Temple of Shamash. Even ordinary citizens can attend this public ritual, standing in the courtyard as the priests perform the sun god's morning rites. The sun is just beginning to peek over the eastern horizon. The priests have positioned themselves on the eastern wall of the temple, ready to greet the god as he begins his daily journey across the sky. As the first ray of sunlight strikes the temple, the priests raise their voices in a hymn of greeting. O Shamash, you rise from the horizon, you release the locks of heaven, you open the gate of the earth, you illuminate the darkness, you drive away the demons of the night. Before you, injustice cannot stand. Your light reveals all hidden deeds. No evil can escape your gaze. The hymn continues, praising Shamash's justice, his wisdom, his daily labour of crossing the sky to bring light to the world. And as the priests chant, we can see what they mean. The darkness of night is indeed fleeing before the advancing light. The city is becoming visible, revealing its layout, its structures, its inhabitants. What was hidden is now revealed. This daily miracle, so familiar that we usually take it for granted, is understood by the Babylonians as a divine act, worthy of praise and thanksgiving. The sun does not rise automatically, but is guided by a god who chooses to continue his labours on behalf of humanity. The priest's morning hymn is not just celebration but also supplication, asking Shamash to continue his beneficent work. As the sun fully clears the horizon, the mood of the ritual shifts from greeting to petition. Individual worshippers step forward to place offerings before the temple, to speak their prayers aloud, to ask for the sun god's favour in their particular concerns. A merchant asks for success in an upcoming trade journey. A mother asks for healing for her sick child. A scribe asks for wisdom in interpreting a difficult legal case. Each prayer is specific, personal, heartfelt. These are not abstract meditations, but concrete requests for divine intervention in the challenges of daily life. The priests receive these prayers and offerings, promising to convey them to the god in the inner sanctum. They offer blessings in return, invoking Shamash's favour on the petitioners. These blessings are not empty formulas, but are believed to have real efficacy, to actually channel divine power toward beneficial ends. As we watch these interactions, we are struck by the immediacy and concreteness of Babylonian religion. The gods are not distant abstractions, but immediate presences, actively involved in every aspect of life. You do not wonder whether the gods exist or whether they care about human affairs. Their existence and their involvement are simply assumed, as obvious as the sun in the sky. The morning ritual concludes. The priests withdraw to the interior of the temple to continue the more private ceremonies. The worshippers disperse, heading off to their various occupations, confident that they have done what is necessary to secure divine favour for the day ahead. We linger in the courtyard for a while, watching the city come fully to life. The streets are filling with people. The sound of human activity rises to a steady hum. Conversation, laughter, the cries of street vendors, the rumble of carts, the braying of donkeys. Babylon is magnificent in the morning light. The glazed bricks of the Ishtar gate gleam blue and gold. The walls of the ziggurats show their different colours clearly. The Euphrates reflects the sky, a band of blue cutting through the tawny brown of mud brick architecture. Gardens and groves of trees provide splashes of green, a welcome contrast to the predominant earth tones. It is hard to believe that all of this will one day be gone, reduced to buried ruins that future archaeologists will painstakingly excavate, trying to piece together the life of this magnificent city from fragments of pottery and broken tablets. But gone it will be. Babylon's glory is not eternal, despite what its inhabitants might believe. The gods they serve will cease to be worshipped. The temples will crumble. The priests will disappear. The elaborate rituals will be forgotten. Even the languages they speak and write, Akkadian and Sumerian, will die, surviving only in ancient texts that will take modern scholars centuries to decipher. But in this moment, in the eternal present of our imaginary journey, Babylon stands at the height of its power and glory, confident in its place as the centre of the world, secure in the favour of its gods, its forbidden temples, the axis around which all else revolves. Let us make one more visit before we conclude our journey. There is one temple we have not yet explored, the Temple of Ea, god of wisdom and fresh water, deity of the deep. Ea's temple is located near the river, appropriately enough, in the southern quarter of the city. As we approach, we can hear the sound of water. The temple complex includes an elaborate system of pools and channels through which fresh water constantly flows. This running water is itself a form of worship, an offering to the god who controls all freshwater sources. The priests of Ea have a particular reputation for learning. Ea is the god who gave humanity the arts of civilization, agriculture, writing, mathematics, medicine, magic. His priests are scholars and sages, masters of the accumulated knowledge of generations. We enter the courtyard and are immediately struck by how different it feels from the other temples we have visited. Where the temple of Marduk felt powerful and imposing, where Ishtar's temple felt sensual and mysterious, Ea's temple feels contemplative, intellectual, a place dedicated to thought and understanding. We see scribes sitting in the shade of a colonnade, copying ancient texts, preserving knowledge for future generations. We see students reciting lessons, memorizing the complex signs of cuneiform writing. We see scholars engaged in quiet discussion, debating points of theology or cosmology. There is a library here, one of the great repositories of knowledge in the ancient world. Clay tablets by the thousands are stored in special rooms, organized by subject, catalogued carefully so that any particular text can be found when needed. Here are mathematical texts, explaining methods for calculation and problem solving. Here are medical texts, listing diseases and their treatments, carefully noted symptoms and prognoses. Here are astronomical observations, decades of careful sky watching reduced to tables and predictions. Here are omens and their interpretations, vast compendia correlating celestial and terrestrial phenomena. And here, most precious of all, are the myths and epics, the foundational stories of Babylonian civilization. The Enuma Elish, the creation story that tells of Marduk's victory over Tiamat and his creation of the ordered cosmos. The Epic of Gilgamesh, that ancient tale of friendship and mortality and the vain search for immortality. We are allowed to examine one of these tablets carefully, under the watchful eye of a priestly librarian. The tablet is cool and smooth in our hands. The cuneiform signs march across its surface in neat rows, pressed into the soft clay before it was baked hard. Each sign is a combination of wedge-shaped marks, representing syllables that combine to form words, sentences, stories. The text we are holding is part of the Gilgamesh epic, the section where the hero mourns his friend Enkidu and contemplates his own mortality. We cannot read the cuneiform ourselves, but the librarian translates for us, his voice soft and reverent, treating the text with the respect due to sacred scripture. When I die, shall I not be like Enkidu? Sorrow has entered my heart. I am afraid of death. I roam the wilderness seeking the secret of life. Perhaps Utnapishtim, who survived the flood and was granted immortality by the gods, can tell me how to escape death. These words, written nearly 4,000 years ago, still have power. The fear of death, the desire for immortality, the search for meaning in the face of mortality, these are universal human concerns, transcending time and culture. Gilgamesh's quest, ultimately unsuccessful, to avoid death, reflects humanity's eternal struggle to come to terms with our mortality. The priest explains that this story is used in the education of young scribes, not just to teach them cuneiform writing, but to teach them about life, about friendship, about accepting the limitations of human existence. It is literature, but it is also wisdom literature, meant to shape character and understanding. We thank the priest and carefully hand back the tablet. He returns it to its proper place in the library, ensuring that it will be available for future scholars and students. This is one function of the Forbidden Temples, the preservation and transmission of knowledge, the maintenance of cultural memory. Without the temples and their scribal schools, the accumulated knowledge of Mesopotamian civilization would have been lost. Farmers might have continued to know how to plant and harvest, but the more complex and specialized knowledge, the mathematics and astronomy and medicine and law, all of this depended on written records and trained interpreters. The temples provided both. We leave the library and make our way to the cellar of Ea's temple. We have been granted permission to witness the midday service, a ritual of wisdom-seeking conducted by the high priest on behalf of the king and the city. The cellar is quieter, more subdued than others we have visited. Ea is not a god of drama and spectacle, but of contemplation and insight. His statue shows him seated, a long beard flowing down his chest, his hands folded in his lap, his expression serene and thoughtful. The high priest enters alone. He does not bring elaborate food offerings or engage in complex ceremonies. Instead, he sits before the statue in silence for a long time. We watch, barely breathing, not wanting to disturb the profound silence that fills the room. Eventually the priest begins to speak, but in a tone quite different from the chanted prayers we have heard in other temples. This is more like a conversation, an intimate dialogue between the priest and the god. He describes problems facing the kingdom, a dispute with a neighbouring city, concerns about the river level, questions about the interpretation of an omen. He does not demand answers, but rather lays out the issues, inviting divine wisdom to illuminate them. Then he falls silent again, listening. What he hears in that silence, we cannot know. Perhaps he hears nothing, or perhaps he hears the still small voice of divine wisdom speaking directly to his heart. Perhaps the answers come later, in dreams or through the divination techniques he will employ after leaving the cellar. But it is clear that he trusts the process, that he believes Ea will provide the wisdom needed. This is faith, not in the sense of blind acceptance, but in the sense of confidence in a relationship. Trust that the God who has guided the city for generations will continue to do so. The priest rises, bows to the statue, and exits the cellar. We follow him out into the bright midday sun. The city is at its busiest now. The markets are thronged with shoppers. The streets are crowded with traffic. Life goes on in all its messy, complicated glory. And that, we realise, is the point. The forbidden temples are not meant to be escape from life, but resources for living. They provide the spiritual foundation that makes civilization possible. They offer meaning and purpose, guidance and wisdom, healing and hope. They connect individuals to community and community to cosmos, linking the smallest personal concerns to the grandest divine purposes. We have reached the end of our journey through the forbidden temples of Babylon. We have walked the sacred streets, entered the holy precincts, glimpsed the mysteries that lie at the heart of this ancient civilization. We have seen the temples not just as buildings, but as living institutions, centres of religious, intellectual, economic and social life. As we prepare to leave Babylon and return to our own time, we take one last look at the great ziggurat of Marduk rising above the city. In the harsh light of noon, it seems almost a shimmer, as if it might at any moment dissolve back into the realm of myth from which it came. But it is real. It existed. Generations of Babylonians saw it every day, drew comfort and meaning from its presence, organised their lives around the rituals performed within and upon it. And though it is gone now, though its bricks have been scattered and its foundations buried under millennia of sand, the questions it tried to answer, the needs it tried to meet, remain with us still. We seek meaning. We seek connection. We seek to understand our place in the cosmos. We seek wisdom to guide our choices. We seek hope in the face of mortality. We seek community with our fellow humans. All of these needs, which the Babylonians address through their temples and their gods, are still our needs today. We may answer them differently, through different institutions and belief systems. We may no longer believe that statues house divine presences or that celestial movements reveal divine will, but we still seek what the Babylonians sought, a life of meaning and purpose, lived in connection with something greater than ourselves. And so, as we bid farewell to ancient Babylon, we do so not with condescension toward a superstitious past, but with respect for human beings who, like us, sought to make sense of existence, to find their place in the universe, to live well in the face of uncertainty and challenge. The forbidden temples of Babylon stand as monuments to this eternal human quest. They remind us that we are part of a long tradition of questioning and seeking, that our ancestors wrestled with many of the same concerns that occupy us, that we are connected across the millennia by our shared humanity. May their memory inspire us to approach our own questions with the same seriousness and dedication that the Babylonians brought to theirs. May we build our own temples, whether physical or metaphorical, as centres of meaning in our lives. May we preserve and transmit the wisdom we have gained, as the scribes of Ea preserved their texts. May we seek justice, like the priests of Shamash. May we embrace the full complexity of human experience, like the worshippers of Ishtar. May we strive to maintain order in the face of chaos, like the servants of Marduk. And now, as the day wanes and evening approaches, as the sun god Shamash begins his descent toward the western horizon, let us continue our exploration. There are still more secrets to uncover, more layers of meaning to peel back from this ancient civilization that flourished between the two great rivers. We stand now at a crossroads in the city, where 4 streets meet. At this intersection, there is a small shrine, barely more than a niche in a wall, but within it sits a small clay figurine. This is a protective deity, one of the countless minor gods and spirits that populated the Babylonian cosmos alongside the great gods of the temples. The Babylonians understood the divine realm as a vast hierarchy, much like their own social structure. At the top were the great gods, Marduk, Ishtar, Shamash, Sin, Ea, and a handful of others. But below them were countless lesser deities, each with their own sphere of influence, their own concerns, their own worshippers. There were gods of specific trades and crafts. There were gods of particular neighbourhoods and districts. There were gods of doorways and thresholds. There were gods of diseases and gods of healing. There were gods who protected travellers and gods who watched over merchants. The world was absolutely teeming with divine presences, great and small. This understanding had practical implications for daily life. You might offer prayers at one of the great temples for major concerns, seeking the intervention of a powerful deity in matters of war, politics, or major agricultural cycles. But for everyday concerns, for protection of your home, or success in your craft, you would turn to these smaller, more accessible spirits. The figurine in the shrine before us represents Pazuzu, a demon god known for his fierce appearance, but also for his protective powers, particularly against other, more malevolent demons. Pazuzu is often depicted with a dog-like face, a scaly body, bird talons for feet, and wings. He is terrifying to behold, but this very terrifying quality makes him an effective guardian. A woman approaches the shrine carrying a small offering of bread. She's pregnant, we can see, and she speaks a quiet prayer to Pazuzu, asking him to protect her and her unborn child from Lamashtu, a particularly feared female demon who was believed to prey on pregnant women and infants. The woman places her offering in the shrine, touches her fingers to her lips in a gesture of respect, and continues on her way, her face showing a mixture of fear and hope. This is religion at its most immediate and personal. The great temple rituals, for all their grandeur and cosmic significance, can sometimes feel distant from the immediate concerns of everyday survival. But these small shrines, these minor deities, these are the gods who are believed to walk the streets alongside ordinary people, who understand their fears and needs, who can be appealed to directly without the mediation of professional priests. As we continue walking, the afternoon light begins to take on that golden quality that comes in the hours before sunset. The heat of the day is passing, and the city seems to breathe a collective sigh of relief. People emerge from the shade where they have been resting through the hottest hours. Children play in the streets. Women gather at wells to draw water and exchange news and gossip. We make our way toward another significant temple complex, one we have not yet visited in detail. This is the Temple of Ninurta, god of war and agriculture, a deity who embodies the paradoxical relationship between destruction and creation, between the violence necessary to defeat enemies and clear land, and the careful nurturing required to grow crops and build civilization. Ninurta's temple reflects this dual nature. The courtyard is divided into two distinct sections. On one side, we see weapons displayed on racks, spears, swords, bows, bronze armour. These are offerings from soldiers who have survived battles, dedications of captured enemy weapons, gifts from generals grateful for victory. The walls on this side are painted with scenes of warfare. Soldiers in formation, chariots charging, cities under siege, enemies in flight. But on the other side of the courtyard, the imagery is completely different. Here we see agricultural scenes, farmers ploughing, workers harvesting grain, people tending date palms, shepherds with their flocks. The offerings on this side are not weapons but agricultural implements, sickles, hoes, ploughshares. There are also offerings of grain, dates, and other produce, first fruits of the harvest dedicated to the god. This duality reminds us that for the Babylonians, warfare and agriculture were not opposite activities, but complementary aspects of maintaining civilization. You needed warriors to protect your fields from raiders and to expand your territory when resources grew scarce. But you also needed farmers to produce the food that fed those warriors and sustained the population. Ninurta presided over both activities, blessing both the sword and the plough. We enter the temple proper and find priests conducting a ceremony that perfectly illustrates this dual nature. A group of young men is being inducted into military service. They stand before the altar, holding their newly issued weapons, while a priest intones blessings and invocations, asking Ninurta to make them strong in battle, to give them courage in the face of danger, to bring them home victorious. But the ceremony also includes agricultural symbolism. Each young soldier is given a handful of grain, which he must eat as part of the ritual. This grain represents the land they are sworn to protect, the harvest they fight to secure, the civilization they serve. By eating it, they literally incorporate into their bodies the thing they are pledged to defend. The priest explains to them that they are now servants of Ninurta in both his aspects. In peacetime, they may be called upon to help with major agricultural projects, building or maintaining irrigation canals, clearing new land for cultivation, constructing roads and bridges. In war, they will fight. But both activities serve the same ultimate purpose: the maintenance and expansion of order, the pushing back of chaos, the creation and preservation of civilization. As the ceremony concludes, the young men file out of the temple, their faces showing a mixture of pride and apprehension. They know that they are now part of something larger than themselves, that their individual lives have been dedicated to a collective purpose. This sense of being part of a greater whole, of serving not just a king or a city but the gods themselves and the cosmic order they maintain, is central to the Babylonian understanding of meaningful existence. We leave Ninurta's temple and wander through the residential quarters of the city. Here, away from the monumental architecture of the temples and palaces, we see how ordinary people live. The houses are built of mud brick, typically arranged around a central courtyard. The rooms are small and simple, with few furnishings. Life is lived largely outdoors, in the courtyards and on the rooftops where people sleep during the hot summer nights. But even here, in these modest dwellings, we see evidence of religious devotion. Each house has a small household shrine, usually just a niche in a wall, where figurines of protective deities are kept. Offerings are made here daily: a bit of food, a cup of water, a flower. These household gods are the first line of defense against the various evils that might threaten a family: disease, theft, fire, domestic discord, infertility. We pause at one house where we can hear a woman chanting quietly. She's performing a healing ritual for a sick child. The child lies on a mat, feverish and listless. The mother has called in a priestess, a woman trained in the medical and magical arts, to perform an exorcism. For the Babylonians did not distinguish sharply between natural and supernatural causes of disease. Illness was understood as the result of demonic possession or divine punishment, and treatment required both practical medical interventions and religious rituals. The priestess combines both approaches. She prepares a poultice of herbs, which she applies to the child's forehead and chest. But as she does so, she recites incantations, spells designed to drive out the demon of fever, to break the hold of disease on the child's body. She calls upon various healing deities: Gula, the great physician goddess; Ninisina, lady of healing; Damu, the youthful god of life force. The incantations are long and complex, full of metaphorical language. The disease is described as an enemy army that must be defeated, as a storm that must be calmed, as a serpent that must be expelled. The healing gods are called upon to act as divine warriors, physicians, exorcists. The child's body is described as a temple that must be purified, a city that must be defended, a field that must be cleared of weeds. This ritual language serves multiple purposes. On one level, it is understood to have direct magical efficacy. The words themselves, properly spoken, compel the demons to flee and the gods to act. But on another level, the ritual provides psychological comfort to the anxious mother, giving her a sense that something is being done, that powerful forces are being marshalled on behalf of her child. The priestess completes her ritual and accepts payment, a small amount of barley, some wool. She promises to return the next day to check on the child's progress. As she leaves, she reminds the mother to continue making offerings at the household shrine to keep the protective spirits well disposed toward the family. We follow the priestess as she makes her way through the streets. She's on her way to another call, another sick person in need of her services. As we walk, we notice how she is treated by the people we pass. Some nod respectfully, recognizing her role and expertise. Others avoid her gaze, perhaps uncomfortable with her association with disease and death, perhaps worried that she might see some spiritual pollution clinging to them that would require expensive purification rituals. Her life illustrates another aspect of the temple system. Not all religious professionals served in the great temples. Many operated independently or in association with smaller shrines, offering their services directly to the population for fees. This created a kind of religious marketplace, where different practitioners competed for clients based on their reputations and the effectiveness of their rituals. Of course, the great temples tried to maintain control over religious practice to ensure that only properly trained and authorized persons performed certain rituals. But in practice, enforcement was difficult, and there was always a shadow economy of unofficial practitioners, local wise women and cunning men who claimed special knowledge or divine favour, but lacked official priestly credentials. We reach the edge of the city now, approaching the massive walls that encircle Babylon. These walls are themselves almost unbelievable in their scale. Ancient sources tell us they were wide enough for 2 chariots to pass abreast on top, tall enough to discourage any army from attempting to scale them. They run for miles, completely encircling the urban area, and even enclosing some agricultural land and gardens within their circuit. The walls are not just military infrastructure, but also sacred architecture. Their construction was a religious act, carried out under the supervision of priests with the blessing of the gods. The bricks from which they are built were consecrated before being laid in place. Foundation deposits were buried at key points, precious objects, inscribed tablets, figurines of protective deities, all intended to give the walls spiritual as well as physical strength. We climb one of the stairs that leads to the top of the wall. From this vantage point we can see both the city behind us and the landscape beyond. Inside the walls, order, civilization, the realm of the gods, and human society working in harmony. Outside the walls, the wild, the unpredictable, the realm of demons and dangerous beasts, the chaos that civilization holds at bay. This spatial division reflects the fundamental Babylonian worldview. Civilization is not natural or inevitable, it is a hard-won achievement, constantly threatened, requiring constant effort to maintain. The walls are a physical manifestation of this effort, but the real work of maintaining order happens in the temples, through the daily rituals that keep the gods satisfied, that maintain cosmic balance, that ensure the continued defeat of chaos and the preservation of order. As we stand on the wall, watching the sun sink lower toward the horizon, we see caravans approaching the city gates. These are merchants returning from long journeys, bringing goods from distant lands. We see produce carts coming in from nearby villages, farmers bringing their goods to sell in the city markets. We see shepherds driving their flocks toward the city for the night, seeking the protection of the walls and the gods who dwell within them. The gates will close at sunset. This is a firm rule, rigorously enforced. The night belongs to demons and dangerous spirits. Inside the walls, within the city blessed and protected by the gods, there is relative safety. But outside, in the darkness, dangers multiply. Only the foolish or the desperate travel at night, and they do so at great risk. We descend from the wall and make our way back toward the centre of the city. The quality of light has changed now. The sun is just touching the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange, red, and purple. This is the liminal time, the transition from day to night, a moment of particular spiritual significance. We find ourselves once again at the Temple of Shamash. The evening service is about to begin, the ritual farewell to the sun god, as he completes his daily journey across the sky and prepares to descend into the underworld, where he will travel through the hours of darkness before emerging again at dawn. The priests have assembled in the courtyard. They face west toward the setting sun. As the sun touches the horizon, they begin to chant, "O Shamash, just judge, you have completed your course. You have judged the causes of gods and men. You have brought light to the darkness, truth to falsehood. Now you descend to the land of no return, to bring light even to the dead in their dark realm. Travel safely, great lord. Return to us at dawn. Do not abandon us to the darkness." The chant continues as the sun sinks lower, finally disappearing below the horizon. At the moment of its disappearance, the priests prostrate themselves, a final gesture of respect and supplication. Then they rise and begin lighting lamps throughout the temple, symbolically replacing the sun's light with human-made illumination, a small flame keeping vigil through the night until the gods return. This ritual, performed every evening at temples throughout Babylon, reflects the Babylonian understanding of the sun's daily cycle. The sun does not simply set due to natural astronomical processes. Rather, the sun god completes his work of illuminating and judging the world, and then descends to the underworld to perform similar services for the dead. His return at dawn is not automatic, but depends on his successful journey through the dangers of the underworld and his continued willingness to serve both the living and the dead. As darkness falls over the city, a different rhythm takes over. The daytime bustle of commerce and public activity gives way to more private, domestic concerns. Families gather for their evening meals. In the wealthier households there might be multiple courses, meat and fish, bread and beer, fruits and vegetables. In poorer homes the meal might be just bread and onions, perhaps some lentil stew if times are good. But in every household, before the meal is eaten, a portion is set aside for the gods. This portion is brought to the household shrine and placed before the figurines kept there. Only after the gods have been fed can the human members of the family eat. This practice reinforces the fundamental Babylonian understanding of the relationship between humans and gods. We exist to serve them, and all that we have comes ultimately from their blessing and generosity. After the meal, as darkness deepens, most people prepare for sleep, but some activities continue through the night. The temples maintain their vigil, priests taking turns keeping watch, ensuring that the lamps before the divine statues never go out, that the gods are never left unattended in the dangerous hours of darkness, and there are other activities as well. We make our way to a part of the city we have not yet visited, a district near one of the city gates where taverns and alehouses cluster. These establishments are bustling with activity even as night falls. Men who have completed their day's labour come here to drink beer, to socialise, to escape briefly from the demands and worries of daily life. Babylonian beer was quite different from modern beer. It was thick, almost porridge-like in consistency, drunk through straws to filter out the solid matter. It was nutritious as well as intoxicating, a significant source of calories for working people. The brewing of beer was a sacred art, presided over by the goddess Ninkasi, whose very name means the lady who fills the mouth. There were hymns to Ninkasi that were actually recipes, preserving the brewing process in poetic form. The alehouses were run primarily by women, a remarkable exception to the general pattern of male dominance in public economic life. The alewife was an important figure in Babylonian society, and the law code of Hammurabi includes several provisions regulating their business, specifying penalties for watering down beer or charging excessive prices. We enter one of these alehouses and find a scene of boisterous conviviality. Men sit in groups, drinking from their straws inserted into large jars of beer. They talk, argue, tell stories, sing songs. Some play board games, moving pieces across boards according to the throw of dice or the drawing of lots. There is laughter, the occasional heated exchange that might lead to blows if not for the alewife's stern intervention. But even here, even in this secular setting, religion is not absent. Images of protective deities hang on the walls. Before drinking, men pour small libations, offerings to the gods. Oaths are sworn by divine names. Curses invoke divine punishment on cheaters and liars. The sacred and profane are not separate spheres, but intertwined aspects of a unified reality. As we sit in the alehouse, we overhear conversations that give us insight into the concerns and preoccupations of ordinary Babylonians. Two merchants discuss the risks of an upcoming trade journey to the coast. One of them recounts a dream he had, worried that it might be an omen of danger. His companion suggests consulting a dream interpreter at one of the temples, or at least making an offering to Shamash, god of travellers, before beginning the journey. At another table, craftsmen from the same guild discuss their trade. They complain about the prices they are being offered for their goods, about the taxes levied by the temple and palace, about the competition from imported products. But they also speak with pride about their craft, about techniques passed down from master to apprentice over generations, about particularly fine pieces they have made. Near us, a group of young men discuss women, marriage, prospects for the future. One boasts of his romantic conquests. Another speaks earnestly of a young woman he hopes to marry, if her family will accept his bride price. A third complains about the demands of his wife's relatives, the obligations that come with marriage, the loss of freedom that domestic life entails. These are timeless human concerns, recognizable to us across the millennia that separate our world from theirs. People in ancient Babylon worried about money and status, about love and family, about dreams and fears, just as people do today. The specific cultural forms these concerns took were different, shaped by Babylonian religion and social structure, but the underlying emotional and practical realities were fundamentally human, universal. As the night deepens, the alehouse begins to empty. Most men have homes and families to return to, jobs to wake up for in the morning. We leave as well, stepping out into streets now dark except for the occasional torch or lamp. The city at night has a very different feel from the city by day. It is quieter, more mysterious, slightly threatening. We hear the night watch making their rounds, calling out the hours, ensuring that all is well. We see priests hurrying from one temple to another, carrying messages or ritual objects, their faces serious, intent on their sacred business. We pass by a house where someone is ill, where lamps burn through the night and we can hear low voices chanting healing incantations, and we sense, or imagine we sense, the presence of other beings in the darkness. The demons and spirits that the Babylonians believed walked the night streets. Lilitu, the night demon who seduces men in their sleep. Rabisu, the demon who lurks by doorways waiting to attack the unwary. The ghosts of the unburied dead, wandering restlessly, seeking the proper burial rites that will allow them to rest in the underworld. These beliefs were not mere superstition to the Babylonians, but lived reality. The night was genuinely dangerous, full of threats both natural and supernatural. Wild animals might enter the city under cover of darkness. Criminals operated in the shadows, diseases worsened in the night, and beyond these natural dangers, the Babylonians perceived spiritual threats that were just as real to them as physical ones. Protection against these night dangers came from multiple sources. The city walls kept out the worst external threats. The Night Watch provided human security. Household shrines and protective deities warded individual homes. And most importantly, the temples maintained their vigil, the priests keeping the divine presences engaged and attentive, ensuring that the forces of order never completely ceded control to the forces of chaos. We make our way to a small plaza where there is a public well. Even at this late hour, a few people are here, drawing water for nighttime needs. We hear them speaking in low voices, reluctant to draw attention to themselves in the darkness. They complete their task quickly and hurry home, keeping close to the walls, avoiding the deepest shadows. We follow one of these late-night water carriers, a young woman balancing a jar on her head, making her way through the narrow streets. She is nervous, we can tell, her pace quick, her eyes darting to every shadow. But she also chants quietly as she walks, a protective spell, words meant to ward off evil spirits and keep her safe on her journey home. She reaches her house without incident, slips inside and bars the door behind her. We hear the sound of the bar dropping into place, that solid thunk that means security, that marks the boundary between the dangerous outside and the protected inside. For tonight at least, she and her household are safe, defended by walls and doors and the protective spirits whose images stand watch in the household shrine. We continue our nocturnal wandering, making our way back toward the great ziggurat at the centre of the city. From a distance we can see that lamps burn at its summit, in that high shrine where Marduk is believed to spend the night with his chosen priestess. What transpires in that elevated chamber remains a mystery, forbidden knowledge accessible only to the two participants, but we can observe the broader significance of that ritual. It represents the ongoing relationship between the divine and human realms, the continuous renewal of the covenant that binds Babylon to its god. Marduk chose this city as his special dwelling place. In return, the city and its people dedicate themselves to his service. This mutual obligation, renewed through ritual, is what makes Babylon not just a city but a sacred space, not just a collection of buildings but the axis mundi, the centre of the world. As we circle the base of the ziggurat, we notice other nighttime activities. Astronomers have climbed to high platforms, from where they can observe the stars without the interference of lamplight from the streets below. They watch the heavens with intense concentration, noting the positions of planets, recording any unusual phenomena, comparing what they see with their extensive records of past observations. These astronomical observations serve multiple purposes. They help maintain the calendar, ensuring that festivals occur at the proper times. They provide data for astrological predictions, allowing priests to forecast future events by reading the intentions of the gods in the movements of celestial bodies. And they satisfy a profound human curiosity about the structure of the cosmos, a desire to understand the grand patterns that govern existence. One of the astronomers notices our presence and beckons us over. He is an old man, his eyes weak from years of squinting at distant stars, but his mind is sharp and his enthusiasm for his work is evident. He shows us his observational records, clay tablets covered with rows of numbers and astronomical symbols. He explains what he is watching tonight: Jupiter's movement through a particular constellation, an event that happens only once every 12 years and is believed to signal significant political developments. He speaks of the regularity of celestial cycles, how the same patterns repeat over and over, how this regularity reflects the essential orderliness of the cosmos established by Marduk's victory over chaos. But he also speaks of anomalies, unexpected events like eclipses or comets, which are understood as direct communications from the gods, urgent messages that must be interpreted correctly if disaster is to be averted. We thank the astronomer and leave him to his observations. The night is advancing, and we feel the pull of sleep ourselves. But before we rest, there is one more nighttime ritual we wish to witness. We make our way to the Temple of Sin, the moon god. Tonight is not a full moon, but a crescent, that delicate silver shape that marks the beginning of a new month in the Babylonian lunar calendar. The crescent moon has just risen, hanging low in the eastern sky like a celestial smile. At the temple, priests are performing the ceremony of the new moon. This is one of the most important monthly rituals, for the lunar cycle is fundamental to Babylonian timekeeping and to the agricultural calendar that governs so much of Mesopotamian life. The priests stand in the courtyard, facing the newly risen crescent. They sing hymns of greeting, welcoming the moon god as he begins his monthly journey across the sky. They make offerings, special foods and incense, pleading for the god's favour in the coming month. They perform divination, trying to discern what the month ahead will bring. Will the rains come at the proper time? Will the king's health be good? Will there be peace or war? Will the harvest be abundant? All of these questions are addressed to the moon god, who is believed to know the future because he is part of the divine realm where past, present and future exist simultaneously. The priests do not expect direct verbal answers, but rather look for signs: the behaviour of the sacrificial animals, patterns in smoke or oil, dreams that will come to them after the ritual, coincidental events in the days ahead that will reveal the god's response. As we watch this ceremony, we are struck once again by the complete integration of religion into every aspect of Babylonian life. Time itself is sacred, marked by divine cycles. The new moon is not just an astronomical event but a religious festival, the calendar that governs when to plant and harvest, when to wage war or make peace, when to marry or sign contracts. All of this is ultimately religious, based on the movements of the divine bodies in the sky. The ritual concludes. The priests withdraw into the temple, leaving offerings to sit before the god's statue through the night. The moon continues its slow climb into the sky, its pale light mixing with the lamplight from the temples and homes below. We are tired now, ready for sleep ourselves. We return to our lodging, that simple inn near the temple district where we have taken a room. The innkeeper is awake, sitting in the courtyard, maintaining a lamp as a beacon for any late arrivals. He nods to us as we enter, asks if we need anything. We decline politely, wishing him a peaceful night. In our small room, we lie down on the sleeping mat. The clay lamp flickers, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Through the small window, we can see a sliver of the night sky, that new crescent moon still visible, a silver promise of the month to come. Our mind drifts over all we have seen and learned during our time in Babylon. The magnificent temples with their elaborate rituals, the priests in their dedication and discipline, the ordinary people going about their lives, always aware of the divine presences that surround them, the integration of sacred and secular, the way religion permeates every aspect of existence. We think about what it would be like to live in such a world, where the gods are not distant abstractions or matters of personal belief, but immediate realities, where every action has spiritual significance, where the boundary between the physical and metaphysical is permeable, constantly crossed in ritual and symbol.